I'm going to share with you some of the final thoughts that went through my head right before I was about to exit this reality back in 2014. And my goal by doing so is hopefully to help bring awareness to men's mental health. 2012, my mom was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer, and 8 months later, passed away. And this experience alone at the time felt like it was more than I could handle. But with it came a sudden spiritual awakening, and I evaluated my life because it was like for the first time I realized we're actually going to die one day. And I realized that I'd been an alcoholic for the last 15 years in order to drown out unhealed childhood trauma. And I realized just how much I never really liked it here. And when my mom left, I was like, well, I've never liked it here. And now that my mom's gone, like, I really didn't want to be here. The amount of healing that I saw on my plate at the time felt like it was impossible to heal. So I came to a quick conclusion that I was going to be living out the rest of my days feeling the way I was right after losing my mom to cancer. For the next 13 months after I lost my mom to cancer in 2014, the depression got so bad there were times where I'd be sitting in a chair and I was so depleted of energy and lacked the motivation to continue going that sometimes I'd tell myself, we got to get up. And it would take me like an hour. So you could say things got pretty bad. And despite not wanting to be alive, I always had this belief that I would never commit suicide. And so all I told myself is that I was just going to have to live out the rest of my days. And then the day that I would leave this place would come and it would all be over. But then on July 13th, 2014, I was sitting in my garage just contemplating life when something unexpected happened. And that was, I asked myself a question I never asked myself before. And as I was sitting there, I asked myself, I was like, could you see yourself doing this for another 20 or 30 years? And when I thought about that, I felt my heart sink into my stomach. Almost like I began to panic. I was like, there's no way I can do this. And, I started to get a little angry thinking about the life that I experienced. And I remember thinking to myself, I wish I could just exit this reality. And that's when I heard this voice in my head say, all you got to do is go start your car, come sit back down, and it'll all be right. And for the next 45 minutes, I started evaluating my life almost as if I could justify the sentence. So I started evaluating my life and I thought about how I never really liked it here. And I thought about how, the first 10 years or so of my life, it felt like every night I was going to bed to screaming and fighting and swearing from another room and hearing glasses breaking and large thumps and often ending up in between my parents screaming and crying and begging for them to stop fighting. And one time it got so bad, my mom ended up chasing us around the house with a knife. And I remember locking myself in a room. And as the knife made its way through the middle of the door, I remember, right before I was about to pass out, I remember having a soul fragmentation. My heart just dropped into my stomach like I've never experienced. And then I passed out. But I started thinking about, all the times I was locked in the washroom with a bar of soap in my mouth and told not to make a sound. I started thinking about how, my parents told me every single day something was wrong with me, that I was too skinny, and, I'd be forced to eat these massive meals at the table. And when I couldn't, I'd be, forced to sit at the table for a half an hour and constantly reminded that there was something wrong with me, that I was too skinny, and even taken to the doctors and parents coming to my teachers and asking them if I'm eating. And I was just constantly reminded that there was something wrong with me, to the point that in 2015, 1 year after losing my mom, I hit the gym 5, 6, 7 days a week sometimes, and I was in the best shape of my life, 190 pounds at 6'3". And I still struggled with you know I still struggled with confidence because I always was programmed to believe that there was something wrong with me. I thought about how I would go to school, and basically everywhere I went I was made fun of, whether it was for my glasses, my hair, my name. You always hear, did you know you have a girl's name, everywhere I went. And it felt like once a month I was getting into a fist fight or getting punched for no reason. And I just thought about, how once I graduated high school and basically experienced the exact same thing there, I just became an alcoholic. And I was just like, I gave myself the green light to do what I was thinking about doing, and that's when Archangel Michael appeared. That's a whole nother story for a different video, but I'm very lucky to be here. And looking back on my experience, the one piece of advice I would give to any out there going through a hard time is you need to understand that if you're at that point, you're telling yourself some lies and you're believing them, okay? I told myself I would never be able to heal. I've never felt better. In the last week, I feel better than I ever have in my entire life. So I look at myself back in 2014 and I'm like, look at, we made it in that regard, right? So identify the lies you're telling yourself, stop being so hard, make the changes. It may be tough, but if I can do it, so can you. Please think about sharing this video because I don't know about you, but everyone in my life that's left on their own accord was a complete surprise. Over 61,000 followers, greatly appreciated. Hit that like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.